Jay Powell back to the committee for this oversight hearing. And what a pleasure to say, Madam Secretary, and welcome Janet Yellen back to the committee and your new role as our Treasury Secretary. It's a pleasure to have you both here.
Thank you.
Secretary Yellen, China, Russia, Iran, Syria, Venezuela, and Myanmar are all subject to Treasury's OFAC sanctions programs. Secretary of State Blinken said last week China is committing genocide, and President Biden recently called Vladimir Putin a killer. With Chairman Waters' strong support, now Treasury is considering sending billions of dollars to these dictatorships through the IMF's special drawing rights allocation. Wouldn't you agree that no strings attached liquidity for a genocidal regime like China runs counter to our national interests?
Well, I believe that our national interest involves augmenting the reserves of countries that need it so that at this very difficult time, we don't pressure countries to take contractionary, deflationary actions that would make recovery more difficult. And it's especially important to channel resources to the world's poorest countries that are having a great deal of.
Madam Secretary, I agree completely. And of course, David Malpass has made available $160 billion of concessional loans to the World Bank and the IMF, billions of dollars to those neediest countries through its facilities for some 80 countries. So I think we share that goal. But could you at least certify for us today that China won't receive billions of dollars in this no strings attached liquidity through the SDR allocation?
Well, the funds are allocated in accordance with the quotas that each country has at the IMF in an unconditional way. And so China will be, if this allocation goes through, will receive resources. China is expected to use some of these resources, I believe, to, along with other countries, recycle their SDRs to some of the poorest countries through the Poverty Reduction and Growth Trust, and to provide relief to countries that have outstanding borrowing from China. So I think that China is likely to use SDR resources in ways that will be beneficial to countries around the world.
Thank you for that. I hope that's the case. I'll believe it perhaps when I see it. I hope that's an important part of this discussion of limiting their access. Would you in turn also ensure that third world countries that have been penalized by non-transparent predatory lending from the One Belt, One Road process from China's largest creditor will not be paid with SDR allocations from those poor countries? Can you certify that for us today?
We do want to make sure that SDR allocations are used to release poverty and address real needs. And we'll work with them and with China to ensure that they don't go to repaying loans from the Belt and Road Initiative.
And China, turning to Russia, of course, as I noted, President Biden acknowledged last week that Vladimir Putin is a killer. Killers don't deserve a blank check from the IMF, do they?
Well, as I said, an SDR allocation goes to members in accordance with their quotas in the IMF.
Well, I've argued, and I hope you'll work with us, you're skirting Congress by limiting the SDR allocation to $650 billion that you've discussed with your G7 colleagues. But you're not taking the efforts I think are important for America's national security to limit this hard currency access going to some of the worst regimes in the world. Will you commit to work with Congress to limit this SDR allocation access to Iran, Assad, Venezuela, Russia, China?
We are working with the IMF to craft rules that will promote transparency and make it difficult for countries. They need to find willing partners to exchange SDRs, and that requirement will limit the uses for some of the countries that you mentioned.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I yield back.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.